Kia ora. Welcome to CARE's Whiteness lecture series. In this particular lecture, I'm going to talk about whiteness and the pandemic. Whiteness is a set of ideological constructs that place the values of white culture as normative, as the standard ways in which a society ought to be organized. So, whiteness works by placing white cultural values as universal, as points of aspiration for humanity. It actually achieves this by a variety of techniques through the ownership of systems of knowledge production, as we have argued in the first lecture, through ownership of media and communication infrastructures, as well as through its dominance over political and economic processes. So, what really is white culture, or what are some of the key values of white culture that are integral to the project of whiteness? One of these fundamental values is the value of rugged individualism. Now, whiteness thrives on the projection of this rugged individualism as a desirable marker. You see this all the way from the Hollywood westerns, that genre of Hollywood westerns, to texts such as Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and similar kinds of novels that form the basic infrastructure of the project of neoliberalism, to academic articulations, both generated within academia as well as in think tanks and centers that are dedicated to pushing these notions of individualism. So, globally, since 1970s and since the initial attack of the neoliberal project on Chile to destabilize its socialist democracy so that the neoliberal project can be set up, the infrastructures of whiteness have launched attacks across the globe on communities, on politics, and on economics, seeking to establish an ideology of freedom and liberty based upon and inflected with an aspiration that is deeply individual. So, what is the kind of freedom and liberty that we witness in the narratives of neoliberalism sold across the globe? It is the sort of freedom that is anchored and rooted in the individual, in his or her selfish agendas, and often marketed as enabling self aspiration and emancipation. So, this emancipatory move of whiteness is really critical in the neoliberal project by being able to position the global free market as emancipatory through creation of pathways for the individual. The project of whiteness consolidates its power across the globe. So, what we have simultaneously witnessed then is various forms of concerted attacks on families, on extended relationships, on kinship ties, and on communities. Through the projection of the narrative of individualism as universal. So, what is taken for granted in these projections of individualism is the role of the individual, the emancipated individual, as a participant in seeking out his or her well being and health. But it's also simultaneously erased from this discursive form is the role of communities, the role of relationships, the role of care in sustaining health and well being. Systematically, then, global political economies building up to the pandemic have been reorganized on the logics of whiteness, and more specifically on the logic of individualism, and particularly a form of individualism that places selfishness, self actualization, self help as the moral values justifying the global free market, has worked to dismantle public health, public welfare, systems of care and support. And that forms the backdrop within which we witness the sorts of effects we are witnessing with COVID 19 across the globe. When we look at the depletion of public health infrastructures across the globe, when we look at the depletion of social and public welfare across the globe, when we look at the dismantling of communities across the globe, communities of care, these have to be constituted in the backdrop of the effects of the project of whiteness, embodied in neoliberal interventionism. Now, one of the examples that I want to draw us to in order to make this point is to look at the frameworks available in society for caring for aging parents, for caring for aging grandparents, and for caring for an aging population. In the discursive constructions of whiteness, where individual aspiration that is grounded in self fulfillment takes over as the dominant narrative, care for aging is parsed out, or is parceled out to corporations working on logics of profiteering. The role of aging parents, aging grandparents within families, within communities of care, as resources of wisdom, as resources of love, as resources of care and knowledge sharing, is systematically removed and erased, and instead what we have are aging communities, are private corporations offering aging related solutions, offering health and well being solutions related to aging, and making a whole lot of profit out of it. So, to turn aging itself into a market, whiteness has worked by systematically attacking infrastructures of care, caring, and the ways in which aging has been embedded within communities and collective contexts, in relationships and in intergenerational practices of love and sharing. So, this is just one example then of the ways in which we see the pandemic play out or make visible these sites of whiteness. So when you see large scale infections that are taking place in homes that are meant to support an aging population, when you see failures or gaps in quality and forms of care, in delivering care to an aging population, one must not just stop at looking at whether these forms of care are efficient or not, whether they are well managed or not. One must systematically interrogate the ways in which whiteness has worked to create that industry. And in that process, actually extracted care out of our intergenerational lives and livelihoods, extracted care out of our familial and community based networks, and turned it into a commodity to be transacted. So, this COVID moment is an important moment for us to consider the ideologies and values that have shaped our lives over the past 3 to 4 decades. And it is also a moment for us to reconsider and find ways of dismantling the ways in which our public health, public welfare, and social and community based health and well being structures have been disrupted. So I invite you through this conversation to consider some of these possibilities, consider the ways in which the neoliberal project and the whiteness of the neoliberal project has impacted the nature of care in your life, and how is that playing out amidst the pandemic. Thank you.